Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lisa. I'm going to be your moderator today. We have a really interesting and I think exciting webinar to share with you. A lot of good staff work has gone into this to think about what they want to present to you of the highlights of the California Water Plan Update 2018. I'm going to turn this over to Tamyar Gaveci. He's going to talk to you a little bit about our goals, and then we'll take a little bit of time to introduce people in the room, as well as let you know who's online with us. So with that, Tamyar.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Tamyar, and I want to first welcome you to the webinar overview of Update 2018 of the California Water Plan. For those who are on the webinar, let you know that we do have a number of folks who are joining us in person, and they do have an added consolation in that they are picking up printed copies of the updates. And for those who are virtually joining us, we will show you how to get access to the plan if you haven't had a chance to look at it. And we will give you contact information where you can ask for a printed copy or copies. Certainly over the next few weeks and months, we will be participating in different water events and making printed copies available at that time. So I wanted to thank you for taking time to join us today, and more importantly, thank you for following the water plan, contributing to the water plan, and helping us to make, and the state of California, make it a more informed and hopefully actionable plan. So what's new? We actually have a plan. The last time we convened was in January of this year. We had a webinar, and that was basically to give you feedback on the comments we received on the public review draft. And we were, as you know, in the midst of transitioning from the Brown administration to the Newsom administration. As you'll learn today, the release of this water plan update is seen part and parcel of the development of the water resilience portfolio by the Newsom administration. I wanted to, for those who have the document in front of you, if you could flip to past the messages. We're going to talk about the Secretary and Director's message here in a minute, but if you go to Roman numeral 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, this information was not in the public review draft. And I want to make sure people don't skip over it, because this is the name of the preparers and all of the folks that we have worked with during the preparation of 2018. This includes the authors of 29 supporting documents, plus the members of the Policy Advisory Committee, the Tribal Advisory Committee, and the State Agency Steering Committee. We also, as you'll see later, have posted the list of all of the comments that we receive on the public review draft. We consider those as important contributors to the water plan update. Also, as one of the supporting documents is a complete list of all the contributors to Update 2018. And this is important because we pride ourselves that how over the last 18 to 20 years, we have moved to make the water plan preparation a more participatory process, engaging with Californians to basically have a plan that everyone feels some ownership. So with that, Francisco, if we can flip back to the title slide. What we're going to do now is basically following the agenda, hit some of the high points. And I don't know, Lisa, did you want to go over the agenda, or should we just proceed?
I think we just basically talk about the structure. We're going to provide a little bit of context, which is the governor's executive order, and that's going to be nice to hear from the executive about that. Hear a little bit about what people said about the public review draft. Then we'll get into actually doing a little bit of a walkthrough, and people can find out a little bit more about it. We do have a time that's been set aside for questions. We always appreciate questions. People should feel free, if you're in the room, to type in, just raise your hand, let us know. And we have an online process if people want to send us a chat. Also, I do have the ability to open a mic, so if you do have a headset and are using a microphone, I'll be happy to let you ask the question directly. And we'll get to that later. Then finally, Paul will wrap up and talk a little bit about the next steps. So that's kind of the general order of business for today.
We do know that whether people online are hearing us and following?
So far, people are asking questions, so they are seem to be doing good.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So what I'm going to do is just hit on the messages of Secretary Wade Crowfoot and Director Carla Namath. This is at the beginning of the water plan update. And then Bianca Sievers, who's the policy advisor to Director Namath, will give you an overview on the executive order directing state agencies to develop a water resilience portfolio and an update of where we are at on that process. And Bianca, because she's traveling, will be joining us virtually online. So some of the high points, and I encourage you to read both of the messages because it does provide a really good context for how the Newsom administration sees this update of the water plan. Secretary Crowfoot starts off really by underscoring how partnerships is an essential ingredient and characteristic of California water management, and then noting how Update 2018 includes recommendations to help improve and advance and build on those partnerships with local and regional efforts. He also notes the governor's executive order on the water resilience portfolio with a focus on making California water resources and systems more resilient in light of climate change and other stressors. He also notes how the Water Plan 2018 has an important role to inform the preparation of that portfolio. He also emphasizes that the state is prioritizing he calls it thinking long-range water solutions and investments that really is moving to strengthen our water systems with multi-benefit projects. Director Carla Namath goes on to emphasize how climate change and the extreme events that we have and will continue to experience is really a new reality that we have to acknowledge, understand, and adapt to. The director wants to recognize and acknowledge the importance of local knowledge and information in being able to address these stressors. That Update 2018 includes policy recommendations to help build on these partnerships and provide technical support to regions to really help improve watersheds, groundwater aquifers, and communities. And then finally, again, noting how Update 2018 is seen as an important part of coordinating this water resilient portfolio preparation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bianca, and I have a couple of slides here that Bianca will refer to, but beyond that. So Bianca, it's your turn.
Hey, thank you, Camiar. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I believe. Sorry, time change a little different. Really excited to talk to you. If I could echo anything both Secretary Crowfoot and Director Namath really kind of frame up with their message in the water plan update, really setting the stage for what we're hoping to accomplish with the resilience portfolio. So I'm sure most of you in this room know earlier in the spring, Governor Newsom put out this executive order asking the California Natural Resources Agency, California Environmental Protection Agency, and the California Department of Food and Ag to jointly work together to develop a water resilience portfolio. Now, this portfolio has three main components, and you can see that on the bottom of the screen here: an inventory and assessment. And that's basically asking all of those agencies to go out and look across all of our programs, policies, current investments, and do an inventory of those, and then also do an assessment of where are our gaps. What do we need to be doing to look forward into the future to make sure that we as California are set up to be resilient? And the second component of the executive order outlines a necessary and important step, which is stakeholder engagement. So it's not enough for us to just do an internal review of what we currently have, but also to engage those valuable partners in academia, the private sector, at the local, regional, federal, and also looking beyond into international arenas to see what are things that people are doing out there that are successful, what's not working, and really incorporate that into kind of a comprehensive set of recommendations. And so what's important at this stage is we are kind of moving simultaneously through that inventory and assessment and actively working with stakeholders to incorporate and simultaneously ask them to review some of the things that we are considering as recommendations. And ultimately, the result of that will be a set of policy recommendations, legislative actions, financial actions, all presented to the governor. Now, the timeline I want to set forth for everyone is the expectation is in early October, there will be a draft release available for kind of public commentary and feedback. So leading up to that, that's really where we're ramping up our stakeholder outreach and making sure that we're getting that input on the front end so that by October, it's going to be more of a reactionary to some of the recommendations, with the final product being delivered to the governor in mid-November. And something that's really important to think about here, if we could go to the next slide, don't believe I have control, is the governor has really asked us to look at these principles for preparing the water resilience portfolio. I think we were all very excited when the governor at the State of the State earlier this year kind of really set the stage that this administration cares about water. And to me, I think he sent a clear message that we're not just trying to create something new here. What we're trying to do is we're building upon existing efforts. We're building momentum. It's important that we all are going to continue to fight, protect, and preserve this valuable resource into the 21st century. And what he's tasking all of us in this room and also those agencies that I listed earlier to think about is what does that future landscape look like? This is really, in my mind, an invitation to dream big. And I think what Secretary Crowfoot and Director Namath say all of the time is that we can't do this alone. We need better integration across all of our systems, our partners, and our resources. And I think that these here really kind of epitomize what we're trying to do. So we're trying to prioritize multi-benefit approaches that meet multiple needs. We're trying to utilize the natural infrastructure, such as forests and floodplain. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see here that we're really trying to build upon our existing resources and push that boundary. Ask ourselves, what's something new that we haven't considered or been too afraid in the past to take on? And I think that that's really special, that this water plan coming from CAMIAR and all the stakeholder engagement that team is pushing really builds and sets the stage for kind of this effort. I see the water resilience portfolio as a true alignment across all of our efforts, making sure that we are syncing up across all of our silos and making sure that we are in fact reaching far and wide across our stakeholders. So I think that is something that is so exciting about this portfolio and what will come out of the final product. Something that I wanted to make sure that everyone in this room is aware of is how to contribute to this water resilience portfolio. For those of you who are not aware, there is a website, waterresilience.ca.gov. There is a place on the website for you to personally share your ideas. There's an email handle, input@waterresilience.ca.gov. You can see it here on the right. And there's also a public engagement calendar where you'll see executive order sponsored events that are available for anyone to attend and to participate. And one other thing that I did not mention earlier on, which I certainly should have, if you don't know already, you have to meet her. Her name is Nancy Vogel. She was appointed earlier, a couple months ago, to be the director of the Governor's Water Portfolio Program at the California Natural Resources Agency. And she is an incredible person that is really kind of the centerpiece of making sure we are gathering all of the input and aggregating all of those recommendations into a feasible, cohesive product at the end of the day. So she is really the point person for this effort. Kind of one final point I want to make. I don't know if I have a ton of time. I'm kind of jamming through here. So CAMIAR,
you're doing fine. Bianca, you're doing
you
fine.
Keep me on track. I think something that's really important is, and a kind of a priority that's come out of this effort is making sure that we are kind of modernizing some of our systems. And I think one topic, I'm just going to give an example that's kind of come up out of some of the proposed recommendations is, data and innovation and incorporating new technology. And that's something that there's so much water data that's been out there. And I think, the water plan really establishes such a strong, baseline of bringing parties together and supporting kind of water data in this space. But what this water resilience portfolio can really do is it's almost a forcing mechanism for some of those topics, such as how do we bring and aggregate water data together, for example. And this is something that is really valuable from the perspective of an executive order is how do we push ourselves to kind of align something like that? So starting from that inventory and assessment stage, what data do we have out there? What data do we need to make decisions? And then how can we develop recommendations, whether that is, financial needs, partnership needs, new programs that the state needs to run at the kind of statewide level or local and regional levels? How do we kind of think through an entire problem? And I think that's really what this resilience portfolio is challenging us to do, is how do we think through a lot of these thematic themes that are coming out that really build on all of the work that we've been doing over time. And so if we could go back to those principles on the previous slide, I think that's really important. And what I would leave this kind of group with a charge to is when you're thinking about contributing to an idea to the water resilience portfolio, really take careful consideration into these principles, because we really are trying to think about, at the end of the day, kind of fast forwarding, layering on the impacts of climate change, laying on the political uncertainty that we face, how do we create kind of a stable, steady state effort towards progress, towards making our communities resilient? And these principles, I think, really kind of articulate that well of these bigger buckets that we're hoping to achieve. We're hoping to get the best people in the room, and this is really the time to kind of rally together in an integrated approach. I'm happy to kind of answer, any questions. Didn't want to take too much time, to get down to the details, but I'm happy to address any questions folks may have in the room on where we are, milestones, etc.
Very good. Well, let me just note we have actually 201 people online with us in addition to the folks in the room. And we have a fair number of folks in the room as well. Just as a quick sampling, we've got a number of folks that are representing associations. So people like Aqua, Sierra Club, APA, Audubon, many NGOs. A number of consultants are on the line with us representing major and boutique firms. Roundtable of Regions is represented. We have a number of water agencies up and down the state. Large number of our advisory committee members, as well as tribal representatives. So we have a really significant group of folks that have been able to join us online today. In terms of the room, just as a sampling, I have folks behind me, but I'm thinking how many folks do we have in here? About 30, 35. So, so just you want to just quickly let us know who you are? Bob's one of our advisory committee members.
Mike Henry, I'm with UDEC.
Great.
Mark as well.
Okay.
Robinson.
Adam Bain, the Associated Press.
Mm-hmm.
Tom DeLeone, Volunteer Friends of the River.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Come over here.
Todd Thompson.
Okay.
John Armstrong, I'm representing them. I'm on the Sierra Club Water Committee.
Great. Danny Anderson, Department of Water Resources.
Water Resources Water Plan.
Deirdre Leo, California Water Resources. Chris McCready, Department of Water Resources. Emily Alejandrino, Department of Water Resources.
Abdul Khan, Department of Water Resources. Paul Macera, Department of Water Resources, California Water Plan team.
Cheryl Lemmy, Department of Water Resources.
Mackenzie Duggie, I'm with Ramble.
Brian Allward.
Jennifer Neville, Metropolitan Water.
Terry Darling, BWR.
Lisa Butler, I'm your moderator. Judy Talbot, Project Support.
Francisco Guzman, Water Plan.
Megan Fidel, Water Plan.
Lou Moeller, Water Plan.
Kamyar.
Bill O'Daly, DWR.
Esther, DWR. And I actually forgot to mention, there is a huge number of our sister state agencies was on the line as well. So there's actually, I was scrolling through with that many, actually I'm up now to 204 with that many folks, but I'm not able to read off everybody that's online with us. But let's take Bianca up on our office, or anyone in the room that has any questions. And if you're online with us, feel free to chat with me, and I'll be happy to take that question as well. So the floor is open.
I have a question.
Yes, Abdul.
So my question is, and this has been bugging me for a long time, not related to water resilience portfolio or the water action plan or the water plan, but I need to voice it out. Bianca, in terms of the water resilience portfolio, is there a sort of explicit recognition of how Sigma is related to this portfolio?
Yes, sorry. Thank you for that question. One, I just wanted to state, as you listed all of the partners and introduced yourselves to me, a big smile is on my face, because I think, one, partnerships is very key. And thank you for your question. Yes, there is a specific call out and recommendations will be formed around Sigma specifically.
And that's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Hopefully that addresses, I at this stage, there has not been kind of any formal thoughts that have been released to the public, but there will certainly, I can guarantee there will certainly be something in the portfolio on that.
Thank you. We have an online question from Chris Berry. How does the state water plan align with or have the ability to adapt to and mitigate for the new direction from the federal government vis-a-vis the San Joaquin River and the Endangered Species Act in general?
I'm so sorry. Would you mind repeating that one more time?
Sure. So this person's asking about the state water plan. There's been information in the news lately about the San Joaquin River and different activities that are happening down there. So this person is wondering, is there alignment with the state water plan, or does it have the ability to adapt to and respond to the new direction in terms of the San Joaquin River and the the Endangered Species Act? And Tamara, would that be one to you?
Yeah, I can start. So the water plan is a statewide plan, and we recognize that this is a big state and that we have regions that have particular challenges and assets and goals. And in the 2013 update of the water plan, we had prepared in detail regional reports, which are still very current. So we do have a San Joaquin river region regional report, and I think many of the topics of environmental benefits, environmental goals, and meeting regulatory requirements are covered in each of the regional reports. A point that I'd like to kind of bridge the previous conversation with the question is, what's unique and innovative, and I believe Bianca underscored this, about this water resilience portfolio and the water plan 2018 is we're trying to get out of the sectoral mindset that the flood folks need to do something, the water supply folks need to do something, the ecosystem managers need to do something, and really underscore that to move forward, we need a much more integrated and co-management approach to our water management system. And this even goes to Abdul's question about SGMA, really underscoring that to solve our groundwater challenges, we're going to have much better coordinated operation and management of surface water and groundwater in all affected regions. And so I think to the heart of the question about the San Joaquin is, how can we move to meet the T&E requirements and the state environmental stewardship policies, while at the same time making sure we protect and improve our groundwater basins and water quality and the like. And that's what this multi-benefit approach is all about, is really seeing how by working together we can actually grow the pie of our assets than we have been in the past. And as you'll hear more about the water plan in today's presentation, one of the things that we really underscore in this update are the systemic and institutional challenges that are making dealing with our problems more difficult. And working across institutions, working across water management sectors, working at making sure that our regulatory all our regulations that were developed in multiple silos can actually come together and work in a meaningful way. All of that, it really goes to the heart of the question where the water plan wants to go and where the water resilience portfolio is destined.
Thank you. We do have another question from Teresa Sprague. She's wondering about, in looking at the inventory and the assessment component and the things that are going on with the water plan and the portfolio process, are you looking at other things that have been done, for example, work by Resilient by Design, or the work being done globally by the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative from the Rockefeller Foundation and so on? So, Bianca?
Yes. I heard that. Thank you for that question. Yes, I mean, that is definitely one of the kind of principles that we are trying to embody in this effort. It's not simply about looking at what we already are doing within the state and expanding that, but also doing our kind of due diligence to reach out to different communities locally, regionally, statewide, across the country, internationally. That is, I think, the charge that is being asked by us from Governor Newsom. And I would appreciate those suggestions that were provided in that question. And I think that is exactly what Nancy Vogel is asking for, is additional ideas and input of solutions out there that we could consider as effective recommendations in California.
That's good. Well, we'll make sure you get a copy of the questions from today that gets funneled back to you. So with
Excellent.
that,
Thank you.
we are exactly on time, and so we can go ahead and get this
last note on this topic. Again, on the waterresilience.ca.gov webpage, there is a place where you can sign up to the listserv. And that's the surest way to get, firsthand notification and information about the work that's going to happen between now and November.
Thanks.
Can I just make one short comment?
I'm looking at my watch, and yes.
Yes. I just want to restate, and Kamiar, and then before Kamiar, also Carl Hoggy said this. I just want to state that there is no groundwater resilience without water resilience. So water resilience encompasses groundwater resilience as well.
So one of our next speakers is going to be Paul Massera, and he likes to add quotes to his slides. So we'll have to grab that one to put on the slides. Thank you.
So Bianca, I really want to thank you for taking time while you're traveling to join the webinar and help inform us about the work on the portfolio.
Of course, and thank you to all those in the room. It excites me to hear so many diverse voices are there and ready to help participate in this effort.
Thank you. All right. Well, why don't we
Thank
go
you.
ahead? Thank you. Let's give Bianca a little bit of a hand. All right. Let's go ahead and move to Megan. Megan's going to be talking about what we heard so far. So as I'm guessing many of you who are either online with us or in the room actually provided comments back on the public review draft, and you're probably wondering what the heck happened to them. So that's exactly what Megan's going to talk about next. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Megan Fidel with the California Water Plan, and I helped with assembling the comments, receiving the comments on the public review draft from 2018. We got 20 letters, emails, documents in. We disaggregated those into 362 different comments. Of those comments, half of them were already something we had in the document, or we made the changes. And another quarter of them we kept and held aside to be considered in Update 2023. Another quarter of the comments we found were outside the scope of the water plan, or counter to state policy, or we thought that the comment itself was unvalidated and substantiated. So that's how we took in comments last time and what we did with them. And the overall theme for the comments we got, a top comment we saw many times wanted more explicit connection to the Brown administration's Water Action Plan. So now we'll be hearing about the resilience portfolio instead. We got requests for more context or more specificity. We got requests to explain terminology. We got comments that pointed out there were inconsistent levels of detail. We got comments that wanted the section on novel financing mechanisms to become a supporting document or to be pulled forward more in the water plan. we got comments that had a little bit of tension. Some really liked the plan short format. Some asked for a lot more detail. So those were opposing comments. We got a lot of support for the 6 goals of the water plan, which we'll hear more about from Paul. There was, as always, strong support for empowering locals, and we heard that we wanted to center IRWM and local initiatives even more. And the last thing we heard was a lot of appreciation for our policy and tribal advisory committees. And we heard that we would like even more statewide engagement with those committees.
Great, thank you. Any questions to Megan? All right.
And then you'll see where you can actually see the list of comments. Francisco will talk about that here.
Okay, and that's a perfect segue. Francisco could actually show us, give us a little tour of the website.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm going to give you a tour of the Water Plan Update 2018 webpage and the items you'll find there. So we have a number of components that are part of the update. We also have links to resources that are foundational information for the update. For example, the resource management strategies and update 2013 regional reports. We also have a link to the technical guide, and that'll be ready later this year. For the document, we have links that will take you directly to the messages from the secretary and the director, the executive summary, and we also have a link available that you can download the accessible version of the water plan. We also have a list of all the supporting documents. Currently, we only have 6 available for download. However, this is because these are accessible versions, but we do have the other, the standard version available. So if you would like a copy, just send us an email and we will provide those documents to you. Once those other documents have been remediated, we will post it online. We also have the list of the future state companion plans. These plans were reviewed when we were developing the water plan. We also have the list of all the public comments and the PRD. Again, these are not accessible, but if you would like a copy of those, just let us know. We will send them to you.
And when you say accessible, that's ADA compliant.
ADA compliant, yeah. Yeah, and I encourage you to sign up for Water Plan e-News, and every time we do we post a new supporting document, we will notify you there. So if you like those notices, please sign up. That is it.
Great.
Great, thank you. We'll turn it over to Lou to give us a little bit more detail about what's actually in the plan.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, hello, I'm Louis Muller. I'm the project manager for the California Water Plan. And I really like the fact, and I didn't put this slide together, but somebody put a Yogi Berra quote in there, and I always love those, so that's great. So yeah, we've done the web page and where those those different chapters are and everything else, so I can move on to this. What I'm going to cover is a little bit of chapter 1, and then you're going to hear about chapters 2 through 5 later from other folks here as well. In the chapter 1, it's challenges, titled Challenges to Sustainability. There's a definition of sustainability in there at the first part of the chapter, and it basically the work of chapter 1 set that context for Update 2018. And you know, as part of that, we've had during this update, since our last update in 2013, we've had, you know, unprecedented multi-year drought. We've had the second wettest year on record, as just some examples of things that have happened since then. We have a diverse water supply and use out there. One of the features of the water plan we've carried forward, and we always continue to carry forward, is the water balances. This is a huge data set, and in the water plan, we actually show, in the graphics you can see to the right, show some of these graphics that we have, show the different water balance work, and this is a huge undertaking that the water plan takes on in collecting information where the thought is for every use, there must be a supply. So we balance those two things out and basically come up with a statewide view and then a regional view as well, as you can see to the right here. Also in California Water today is a number of state initiatives and investments are listed in there. And in this, there's 3 pages of things that we took on and what other state actions that occurred, and also a discussion of the 2 propositions that occurred during our last update as well. As part of this also, there's some historical information on investment in water over the, our past here, going back to 2006. There's some facts and figures here. Then one is that $2 billion a year is what we expend, the state of California expends on water management per year. The state allocates about only 2% of the state general fund, and the most of the funds are coming from local and regional agencies. And you can see that on that graphic that's shown on the slide right here, is the blue line being local investment, state being the kind of orange, and then the federal dollars that have been invested being the green line. There's been a decrease over time here in recent of state investment, but there's been an increase in local, which offsets that as well. 75% of these costs are for ongoing costs, so that would be O&M, and planning falls into that realm as well. And then the investment backlog is at least $350 billion over the next 50 years is what we've come. Now, this is all information that was generated from a survey of all the proposed projects that are out there. Now, the other theme in this chapter is that we have a tale of 2 extremes in California, and this is something that anybody that's been involved with water is probably pretty familiar, but in California this is very true. And in some years you can see that the lower line is when our drought periods, historic drought periods we've had, and the upper blue lines are when we've had flood events. And in fact, they overlap in some years. We'll have a flood and a drought going on at the same time. So some of the challenges, and these are the what we term as critical challenges we face. And again, these are things that probably most folks that are involved with water know these things, but we've kind of listed these in this chapter as to, greater drought impacts, unreliable water supplies, increasing flood risk, groundwater depletion and subsidence, degraded water quality, declining environmental conditions, aging infrastructure, and climate change impacts kind of affects everything that we're dealing with here. Now, this is the slide that we've talked about on critical, but all of those critical challenges are kind of the symptoms, if you will, the things that we see above the, if you're talking about a tree, this is the stuff above the ground that we can always see. But our response to these and our effective investment, if you will, is based on the systemic and institutional challenges. And this is something that, Kamiar has talked about in his response, breaking down those silos and working across sectors, getting past these fragmented and uncoordinated decisions and initiatives, and getting past these inconsistent, inflexible, and conflicting regulations. A lot of those were put in place to address a specific issue, but not in a holistic way of other aspects of other sectors around there. So it's not necessarily bad thinking. It's just in its isolation, it becomes a bit of a conflict. The insufficient capacity for data-driven decision-making is something that we are constantly, we as a society seem to not value the collection of data and the dissemination of data as much as we do. We should. And in the water sector, this is a very apparent, and we're always constantly fighting that good fight to try to get more capacity for this kind of collection and dissemination of information so we can make sound decision-making out there. And that kind of, also leads into this insufficient and unstable funding. Now, a lot of our funding in recent times has been coming from propositions. A lot of the planning type work has to be built upon very stable funding. And one of the major recommendations in the water plan is that for a very small investment, you can get some very good planning work that can actually inform your bigger investments in infrastructure. And there's a big call, a big part of the dollars that are needed is for large investments in infrastructure. If we invest better in those planning type of work, you'll get a better return on investment from that. And then inadequate performance tracking. And in, I'm stealing some of Paul's thunder here maybe, but there is a recommendation and some work that we did on the sustainability outlook in the water plan this time, which actually provides a framework for how we can do better performance tracking as well. And so all the recommendations that Paul's going to be talking about next is actually going to be feeding into how we are suggesting what actions we need to take to actually address some of these systemic and institutional challenges, which will get us to those critical challenges as well. And with that, I think, is that Paul? Yeah, I think it's
Move into
Paul.
Yes. Paul's going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on the key messages, goals, and recommended actions.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Paul Macera. I'm the program manager for the California Water Plan, and we're thrilled that you're joining us here this afternoon for all the reasons stated. It's important for us to talk about this together and seek solutions together, and there's a great opportunity with both implementing Water Plan Update 2018, which we'll talk about later in the next steps, and also in fashioning the executive order water resilience portfolio. So it's a great day to plan. So some of the key messages, and a lot of this has been touched on, so I won't belabor it. So shared intent and outcomes is required to accomplish sustainability. And again, sustainability is defined in Chapter 1, and then Camille a little bit later is going to talk about an innovation in this plan where we actually operationalize sustainability. We bring it from an ideal into the practical planning and policy world. So bear with us. So sustainability requires shared intent and outcomes. Goals for the long view, we kind of talked about that, and that's certainly front and center in Governor Newsom's executive order, and it has been front and center with the water plan for going on, 2 decades. Alignment and integration, we have to be pushing and pulling in the same direction as state agencies and local agencies and what have you. We need to make sure that we track things back and base our decisions on things that Californians care about, and put a pin in that because we're going to talk about that also additionally in a more specific way. So tracking and adaptive management, Lou kind of alluded to the sustainability outlook. I'm going to talk about that in the form of a recommendation, and then Camille is going to touch on it in the context of an innovation within this water plan. Time and commitment. A lot of these problems were generations in the making. Some of them may take generations to solve. That's just the fact of California's wild world of water management. Not everything. There are things we can do in the short term and that we can have accomplishments along the way, but true sustainability does require time and commitment. So framing sustainability, this is just kind of foreshadowing a little bit more in-depth discussion later, but what we're suggesting here is there's four societal values that have been communicated to us during the process of updating 2018. And we feel these 4 societal values really encompass sustainability. And again, there is a tool that has been developed for materially being able to craft policy and track the outcomes of policy and investment towards these 4 societal values. But right now, I just wanted to leave you with the scope of the water plan, the scope of the recommendations that we're going to talk about, and the fact that everything we're doing tracks back to these 4 societal values.
Paul, can you also comment on that last part of fostering trust and equity? Because we did have a lot of discussion of how that fits into the societal values.
Well, certainly we talk about the value of partnerships and fostering the trust and promoting the equity is a critical component for success, for everyone's success. And regarding the equity, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more also with some of our recommendations, some folks have been left behind in terms of the planning process or in terms of the ability or eligibility to receive state assistance. And so we've recognized that equity as a key component, a key ingredient for sustainability. And again, we have more than one recommendation to help advance that. So we have 6 sustainability goals within Update 2018. And you'll find that the actions that I'm going to describe are actually sorted by these goals, these 6 goals. And also, just to be aware, in identifying these 6 goals, that helped us kind of set the framework for actually developing the recommendations themselves. So when we recognize that it's important to improve integrated watershed management, we realize, okay, let's drill down on that and let's unpack it and develop recommendations to meaningfully work towards accomplishing that goal. So, and same for all of the other goals. And so I won't read all of them, but integrated watershed management. So some of them are more on the critical challenge side of actions, and that would be Goal 2, is a prime example. That's all about infrastructure. Goal 3 as well, because that's all about restoring ecosystems. And others are more on the institutional side, which is things like 5 and 6, so improving our alignment. And again, I'll get into a little bit more detail within the context of each of the 19 actions. So what I'd like to do for you now is, in a timely manner, so we have a good cadence going here, and I know my colleagues will help me maintain that, because I don't. We have 19 actions, which, by the way, I mean, for context on this, for Update 2013, we had over 300 actions, so we really encompassed the entire breadth of integrated water management. It was I think a necessary, a logic step forward to actually winnow down the recommendations, sharpen them, and in a sense, what we have here then are kind of the priorities for state government. So there's 19, they're implementable, we can get our heads around them. It's not inconceivable, but we can fund these in the near term and for the long term. So important context to contrast what we did in 2013 versus what we did in this Update 2018. So we talked about sorted by the 6 goals. I got ahead of myself, priorities for state government, and then comprehensive in scope. I kind of indicated that with the 4 societal values, and the 6 goals themselves kind of indicate the scope as well. So just a little bit more context before I jump into the recommendations. So for one thing, we remain mindful, and when I say we, I mean our planning partners, our advisory bodies, the general public that came and helped us and provided their innovations and recommendations in our public settings. So we remained mindful of the long view while looking at things that we need to do now. So this isn't something that can be delayed or deferred, the recommendations in terms of implementation. In fact, we do them now to position ourselves to be more sustainable over the long term. Linkages and leveraging. What we're not looking at here in terms of these 19 actions is a hodgepodge. That's the technical term for uncoordinated, unaligned, unlinked potpourri of good ideas. That's not what this is, I'm happy to say. And in fact, it's quite the opposite, to where I can flag them. I'll give you a couple examples, but a lot of these recommendations actually have synergy, they have linkages, they're kind of tiered. They are distinct actions that need to be taken, but towards a common goal. And by definition, that's what alignment is. So it's an important thing to keep in mind as well. And I'll flag a couple of those for you so you get the feel for it. They address all the categories of challenges that Lou Moeller just talked about: critical, systemic, and institutional. Also, you're going to hear more about the funding. Camille is going to talk about that in more detail, but I just wanted to foreshadow that a little bit by pointing out a lot of the funding called for in the water plan in Update 2018 is focused on, you saw it in that goal 2, which we'll look at again here in a minute, but infrastructure and ecosystems. So it's doing stuff. It's restoring ecosystems. There's generative components to this. There's also maintaining, updating, modernizing our infrastructure. And the majority of the funding proposed in this plan is to accomplish that. And the majority of the funding for that is directed to local assistance. I think it was Camille early on recognized that the regions play a very significant role, and Lou Moeller showed you the investment proportionality between local and state and federal governments. We recognize it and we honor it, and we believe that that's an effective way to go forward. So most of the funding, and Camille will talk about that in more detail, most of the funding would be in the form of local assistance. So goal one, there are 3 actions, and for the most part, what we're talking about here overall is improving integrated watershed management, and that means people talking to each other and managing within a system as opposed to one-off projects within a connected system that somebody had talked about earlier, as a matter of fact. So basically better integrating actions among jurisdictions and entities. And an important part of that, so for the first one, for example, would provide baseline funding for integrated regional water management groups, $250,000 a year in baseline funding for each IRWM group. So that would be better enable them to work with groundwater sustainability agencies, local jurisdictions, and so on. So IRWM is doing really well, and with additional funding, we think we can even strengthen the value and the role of integrated regional water management. The second one is also important. This is really the intent here is to increase the utilization of natural infrastructure vis-a-vis multi-benefit projects. So you'll notice a lot of this really harkens back to the executive order, as a matter of fact. Not entirely by coincidence, but there is a very strong nexus. And so the working landscapes, utilizing these natural infrastructure can support all of those societal values that I showed you. And really this type of activity, working landscapes, so that's farming, forests, wetlands, and so on, and the benefits associated with those types of land uses, by the way, just to define working landscapes, has been underutilized, in our opinion, and undervalued. So this is to strengthen that type of effort. And namely, FloodMAR, Flood Managed Aquifer Recharge, is a specific example of a multi-benefit project that is emerging and seems to be getting a lot of traction. We're recommending strengthening funding and activities around FloodMAR. So that's goal one. Goal two. So this is interesting. I foreshadowed the fact that this is a big chunk of the funding that's recommended here because there's one measly action here under goal two. So that's not to say that there's not a lot of innovative and meaningful change built into this recommendation, not to mention funding, which I already noted. But so that this
I think funding and measly don't go together.
Measly recommendation. It would appear that this is there's not a lot of real estate dedicated to this topic, but it is very important. It really modernizes the way the state would fund, evaluate, fund, and manage water resources. And when I say state, I mean, again, a portion of the funding here would be going to state facilities. The lion's share of the portion here would be going to local and regional entities to do their thing. I always kind of say, and there's some, it's probably not quite precise, but really the sustainability at a statewide scale can't be greater than the aggregate of regional sustainability. So that's kind of where this comes from. And so what this would do is provide funding to evaluate infrastructure, existing infrastructure, provide funding to evaluate existing operations and maintenance practices, look where the deficiencies and priorities are, and then direct funding to those priorities. And it offers the same feature at a local and regional scale. So it's more structured, more disciplined type of funding construct than perhaps we've seen in the past. And by the way, the other thing is with this, it's not just looking at existing infrastructure, also new infrastructure. So what types of benefits are emerging, or what types of demands are emerging for different types of infrastructure. And it incorporates or enables implementation of over 30 resource management strategies, which are defined in Update 2013. So it's not just dams, it's not just canals, it's not just conservation, it's all of the above would be eligible type of projects to benefit from this action. Goal 3, this is kind of the analog to the infrastructure, and that is that we care about our ecosystems as well. And there's a lot of restoration that can occur, that needs to occur. In terms of legacy impacts, a lot of the impacts that have occurred generations ago, maybe there's no responsible or available party to actually help fund the cleanup. I think mercury is an example, water pollution, declines in species from activities. That falls squarely in the state's responsibility for helping to fund those types of activities. So getting ourselves back up to par by addressing these legacy long-standing impacts. I don't have to say a lot probably about the next one, facilitate multi-benefit water management projects. This is just to provide funding to explore the types of projects that do deliver multiple benefits. And then the last one on this slide, quantifying natural capital. We have a pretty good handle on infrastructure, concrete, steel, moving dirt. We can estimate pretty well what that costs. We can estimate pretty well what the value is in terms of what acre feet of water. What's of course much more challenging and inconsistent is estimating the value of the ecosystems and the services they provide. That has to be part of the conversation, preferably quantitatively. So how do we formulate these multi-benefit projects? Where's the best value? So this last one, Action 3.3, will enable us to do that by creating a more consistent method for quantifying natural capital. We'd also be working through several governmental organizations, academia, and obviously our advisory bodies, because I think this requires a lot of collaboration. There's been a lot of efforts, and centralizing and developing a consistent one would be.
And related terms, this COMYAR is ecosystem services and natural infrastructure, which comes out of the executive order.
Good. All right. The next one, Goal 4. I mentioned earlier, some people had been kind of left behind in a sense in terms of not being at the table, or in terms of not having even the capacity to be at the table, although they had been, they could authorized to be at the table and participate in public meetings, but a lot of folks don't have the capacity to do that. A lot of communities don't. So one thing this is trying to do is bring more tribal involvement in generally at a regional scale, because as we said, that's really where a lot of the action occurs. So this would provide funding for DWR to actually engage with the tribes. We've been doing it for some time now. We can do it better, and there's a lot of interest in doing it better. And so that's the first recommendation there. The second is disadvantaged community liaisons. There are a few existing such classifications in state service, or functions, I'll say. Leveraging those more effectively, and then looking, do we need maybe more community DAC, disadvantaged community liaisons? So that's what that recommendation is intended to promote. So getting into, again, those like systemic and institutional challenges. Goal 5 is meant to improve government agency alignment, and also address what we've heard for some time now, and what I think you all have heard, experienced, so on, in terms of persistent regulatory challenges. So the first one is to ensure that the ecosystem needs are a consideration, and again, that, by the way, for connectivity, looking back at the quantify natural capital, that's where this comes into play. If we can quantify natural capital, we can do a better job incorporating ecosystem needs into our infrastructure planning and implementation. Streamlining ecosystem restoration permitting. So when something has an obvious and net benefit to the environment, a lot of folks are saying, well, it really makes sense that we not get hung up or delayed or increase the soft costs, or for that matter, abandon a project because it can't be implemented due to permitting constraints. Let's look at that and see if we can do it better, because obviously at the end of the day, there's going to be an improvement to our ecosystems. How can we actually make that happen? So this recommendation suggests state agencies and regulators and regulated get together and talk about that. The third one, is broader than the ecosystem permitting, And what that's saying is there are opportunities, folks have identified opportunities to improve regulatory outcomes. And part of that is regulators getting together with the project proponents, and like resource conservation investment strategies, there's a construct in place to accomplish that, which has mitigation banking and mitigation agreements. That the whole intent is to actually manage for improved regulatory outcomes. And you can see again, just tracking back to these other recommendations, this is for accomplishing those multi-benefit projects, which we've set up some constructs to actually prioritize. So again, a lot of connectivity here with these recommendations. So I think I'll state the obvious and say that, you know, there are a lot of uncertainties in California's water management systems. It's very dynamic, changes over time. Our societal values, or at least our proportional regard for those 4 societal values, changes over time. We need to be adaptive. We need to have more information to actually implement and invest under reduced uncertainty. And so that's what this Goal 6 is intending to do. And we have 7 recommendations under these. So the first one is just more data sharing. A lot of this is consistent with AB 1755, the Open and Transparent Data Act. So really important that we actually accomplish that as a foundation to everything else we do in terms of data-driven decision support. Coordinate climate science. We all need to coordinate and have effective monitoring of climate conditions. So the saying goes, if you can't monitor it, you can't manage it. And not only that, but if everybody's monitoring something else and it's not coordinated, you can't manage it either. Improve performance tracking. This is what Lou Moeller foreshadowed a little bit. We have a framework and a tool to enable us to better track performance. And to me, that, you know, we have to have a terse, succinct description, but to me that understates it a little bit. This tool, what it enables us to do, as a matter of fact, is track state investment, look at where the return on investments are high, look at where they're low, circle back and plan and adapt and implement. So it really enables adaptive management. It's not just kind of looking back and saying, did it work, did it not work? It's a full planning cycle, and we have a graphic in that regard. So sorry, Camille, I'm stealing your thunder, but I'll just leave it at that.
I do want to note for the people online, Paul is actually making a number of hand movements.
Is there graphics? It's a helix. And
with his hands. A lot going on. We're videos.
Which probably distracts from the messaging. So, yeah, I wanted to flag that as being a really important recommendation. That's going to be a real new feature that's going to have real impacts on the way we manage water, positive impacts. Same with the next one, 6.4, because I did just want to pause on those for a second, those two. 6.4 is Regional Water Management Atlas. We've said it probably 3 times now that, you know, engaging the regions and the regions' roles and responsibilities and accomplishments are absolutely essential for statewide sustainability. We need a better method for rolling up regional priorities. First of all, understanding regional priorities, rolling them up into a statewide plan, and looking for opportunities for the state to incent and invest where there's twofers. So an example would be maybe ecosystem restoration, which is squarely a responsibility of the state and at a level. Are there things that we can do, that we can cost share, that can accomplish both our goals and objectives as well as local goals and objectives? And so this will enable us at a project scale to actually get down to the nitty-gritty. These things, you know, identify the projects that have the multiple benefits and the shared intent of state and local actions. Reporting on outcomes. If we improve the way we track outcomes, why not have it as a requirement for receiving state funding that we at least report on the outcomes, what was accomplished. It's easier said than done. You know, it's easy to report on acre-feet of water produced in some cases, but how do you report on the outcomes of ecosystem restoration and other types of things that don't necessarily yield the tangibles of some of the infrastructure projects? So the performance tracking tool will let us do that. We're suggesting in response to a lot of calls and interest for the state to be more transparent and more effective at demonstrating what the outcomes and return on investment are, this is one way to do it. Apply the performance tracking tool as part of a contingency for receiving state funding. Expanding education, there's, we've probably all heard of the Gray Tsunami, so there's succession issues in terms of water management. And in my opinion, the most effective planning that has occurred has been multidisciplinary planning. And often we are trained in one specific course of study. And so another part of this is, can we actually foster and support cross-disciplinary education to actually enable people to have that perspective coming into water management careers in the future. So this involves working with the higher education institutions, state agencies supporting that and providing those types of guidance.
Kindergarten.
Starting from kindergarten. Oh, okay, yeah. That's have to start them young. And then lastly, this is probably a shocker, but sometimes funding can be inadequate and sometimes not stable enough to accomplish all of the priorities. I'm sure no one else has ever experienced that, but that is the case. And there is a call for increased funding, which Kamiara will talk about. It's important to talk about what types of funding mechanisms are available and how can they best be used and how can they most appropriately be used for the types of actions that we're recommending. Capital investment tends to lend itself better for general obligation bonds, for example. Some of the ongoing, not so much ongoing activities, state ops, more on the general fund side of things, tends to make more sense. So that's what this action is intended to bring together state agencies and stakeholders to talk about better ways for more stable funding. And I think that's it. Yes. So that's it. Did I get us off track time-wise? Or are we okay? All right.
Right on point.
Any
We can.
Sure.
Yeah, we did get a question in the Paul was talking, and this person was wondering about whether or not there's been a thought about the way the water plan and resilience portfolio and all of the different kinds of things going on with legislative actions or guidance. Is that going to affect the urban water management plans? Is there going to be some way all of these things that are happening to roll in to some of these other planning processes?
This Kamiar. You may recall that Bianca noted that one of the guidelines for the state agencies to put together the water resilience portfolio is to integrate better the programs that the state already has embarked on. So you may recall that in 2018, new water use efficiency legislation was signed by the legislature and the governor, or approved by the legislature, signed by the governor. And part of that is improving the information that are in urban water management plans and ag water management plans. So that will be carried over as foundation to the water resilience portfolio, while showing how that could be even better leveraged through AB 1755 information and other programs and projects. So that's how I see the urban water management plan. There won't be anything in the portfolio that's going to make new requirements from the urban plans, but to show how the new legislation and those requirements can be better leveraged for water management.
And I would just add too. So in terms of on the ground, the regional water management atlas too would lend itself to bringing in not just integrated regional water management plans, but groundwater sustainability plans, urban water management plans. And again, that's something that's been called for a long time. Is how can we pull these plans together and figure out what to do? And so this tool, innovation, will allow us to do that as well.
Okay. And so far, I don't have any additional online questions. Is there anyone in the room that would like to ask something? Okay, yes, please.
Yeah, so this Kamyar, and what I like.
Oh, yeah, I do have a.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have a question. Okay, if you wouldn't mind coming just a little closer and let us know who you are.
It's Deirdre James, with California Water Research, and I look at climate change and impacts on California's developed water system. And there's a lot of new information that's coming out, about increased frequency of flooding, about dramatic new projections of sea level rise. And obviously there isn't time for the water portfolio to fully standard that. And how do you see the assessment in light of this new information?
Okay, thank you. Can I?
Yeah, this Kamyar, I can take a stab at it, and then others can add in. So since the end of April, when the executive order came out, the state agency, the first step was to begin pulling together information for the assessment part. So part of it is, again, because we work in our own agencies and silos, we may not know what information other, have. So part of the first step was, let's get our arms around that information. And to the extent that we have information that's available, that will be reflected at least in the base information for the portfolio. You may have recall that Bianca also noted that during that activity, we also wanted to identify information gaps. And so some of the recommendations in the portfolio could well be what we need to do to fill those information gaps so that the state has better information about climate and other stressors that affect water resources and water infrastructure.
Anybody else want to add in on that? We've also received an online question, and this is related to the integrated regional water management. This person is noting the importance of the local government, land use planning, a variety of, so for example, you have to have collaboration on the land use planning as well as all these other things are going to be used together. And how is the state planning to look at this balancing of local county owners and powers, the way that you're going to integrate your processes with these other things that have to be done locally?
I think a number of the recommendations that Paul reviewed is intended to help that connection. So one is when we talk about integrated watershed management, it's not just about the water, it's also about the land uses that affect or are affected by water. That coordination at the watershed level, at the groundwater aquifer level, at a community level would require better connection, information exchange between land use planners and water managers and planners. If you recall, one of the actions there was about working lands and natural infrastructure. And so really, it's not just lands for commercial use, not just privately owned land, it's all of the above. And we have to make sure that that's part of that integrated space. You also may recall one of the principles of the portfolio, at least one, is to integrate across state programs. Now, the state does not make land use decisions, but the Office of Planning and Research does put out the guidebook or guidelines for land use planning and what should go into a general plan. And so that is a connection between state activity on land use and the local decisions. FloodMAR, as we get into that certainly it has land use because it's the application of floodwaters on agricultural and working land. So throughout these recommendations, there is an intent to bring land use decision and water decisions.
Mhm. And I think this is a question from Diane Johnson Trey. I think she was really kind of reaching to this idea of jurisdiction and where the powers are resting in terms of making land use decisions and how that all happens.
So there's nothing in the water plan that would suggest that those jurisdictional authorities be changed. However, the emphasis is we need to come up with collaboratives on spatial scales that make sense for water, be it a watershed, an aquifer, and community. Just like integrated regional water management, just like groundwater sustainability agencies, the entities within those collaboratives still maintain their authorities and jurisdiction, and they have to go a step further and try to work across those jurisdictions for the betterment of each other. And what we would advocate, and I'll mention as part of this innovation, is that by doing so, will grow the pie. That we have not been able to really realize the assets that can be realized because of our institutional frameworks. That the water cycle does not operate as efficiently as it can because of the overlay of institutions and the very decentralized nature of that.
I'm going to just note we have a significant number of local governments online with us right now.
Are they relieved?
So I haven't seen anybody raise their hand or any red flags come up, but if you are online and you want to say something, feel free to hop in. I also got another question about the endangered species protection and the idea that now with climate change, a lot of our structure is based on preserving legacy environments, the way that things used to be, and now they're going to be new because of the way the climate is changing. And this person is wondering, the way that we do things is based on this legacy behavior, and we know it will probably be not as effective in the current climate crisis. Is there a path forward? And the person's asking specifically about the water plan and the resilience package generally. Is there a path forward for regulatory reform to allow for adaptation to a changing climate? And is a reconciliation ecology approach being considered? And just kind of, would this rest in a water plan or an resilience portfolio? Where would such a thing live? And that's from Ian Pritchard. Go ahead.
Yes.
And both.
From everything that I understand that's in the water plan, intent is to certainly even having a goal to say that we need to address and move toward regulatory alignment is about that. The portfolio is all about the reason the word resilience is put in there is to recognize the need to adapt to climate. And I think that would recommendations about how to improve regulatory outcomes in the context of climate change and other stressors will be a part of the portfolio. But this is a work in progress, and I would recommend and suggest that these ideas be forwarded to Nancy Vogel and the portfolio planning team so that they are considered as we move forward.
Okay, great. And so, yes, and I actually got a thank you back on your last response. So you're welcome. So you were on point. Okay, thank you. All right. With that, then I think we probably can talk a little bit about the innovation.
Yeah, and this is just doing a little deeper dive on the topics that both Lou and Paul have described. And the first innovation is really recognizing that to get to where we need to go, and again, that's in the context of extreme events, climate change, the fact that our extremes are more consequential, will likely be more frequent, and that some of the outcomes or results of those changes really are inconsistent with the way we have plumbed our water management system. So given that climate change is affecting our snowpack and snowmelt dynamics, how is that going to affect the infrastructure that we now have and the way we operate? And how do we handle that? And this flower diagram is really intended to recognize that the various water management sectors, and historically, and even to a great extent today, the work is in the periphery of those petals of the flower, where there's little or no overlap between sectors. And the message here is to be more sustainable and have more resilient water resources and systems. We need to work toward the center of this flower, where there's more and maximum overlap between the various water management sectors. And what that requires, and what would really be what we call integrated watershed management, is that the sectors need to collaborate at levels and scales that we have not to date. And even so far as what I would say, we have to move toward a co-management approach. Our flood managers, our groundwater managers, our ecosystem managers, et cetera, need to be working together in real time to recognize how to be more adaptive and agile in our water management. What this also provides us is a multidiscipline framework for planning, because various sectors have various disciplinary expertise. And the whole goal of this activity is to come up with multi-benefit projects. Let's plan for projects that give us benefits for a number of these water management sectors concurrently, and by doing so, we can actually put together funding from the various water management sectors. Right now, our funding are siloed in many respects as our sectors, and we don't commingle funding as much as we can and should. And this co-management approach will give us the ability to do that. The other part that Paul mentioned is that we have to recognize this is not a once and done activity. Sustainability is a journey, it's not a destination. The world changes around us as soon as we adapt, so we have to be much more agile, and we have to recognize, whether it's in our policies, whether it's in our practices, and even in our regulations, that we have to give ourselves permission to act, make mistakes, and learn and improve, and do this in a cyclical fashion. Now, to do that, though, we have to have a way to describe outcomes, indicators, and return on investment much better than we do today. So it's not just about how much money we spent. It's not about just how many projects we completed, but we have to understand, how do those relate to those 4 societal values. So here's just for instance, so if we look at the public health and safety value, one of the outcomes could be an adequate water supply for domestic needs, sanitation, and fire suppression. That's really what we want to get. But to understand how we're doing, we will need an indicator, something like the number of public water systems that are out of compliance. And we have put together a tool we call the Sustainability Outlook. It's described in great detail in the supporting documents in the water plan. It includes the 4 values, about a dozen outcomes, and 3 dozen indicators. And for this update of the water plan, we have the ability to partner with a number of entities. They're listed on the bottom of this slide: California Forward, Pacific Institute, the Water Foundation, Sonoma County Water, and Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, and ask them to try to apply in some way the sustainability outlook to the work that they have and plan to do. And there are supporting documents, again, of those 29 that documents these pilot projects. And this was kind of put our toe in the water and see if and how a framework, a tracking framework, could be applied at a regional, local scale in a way that makes it consistent, that could be rolled up and reported in a statewide presentation through the California Water Plan. So you also heard from Lou and Paul, one of the innovations is this Regional Water Management Atlas. You heard me in response to a question earlier say the water plan has had regional reports. But the reality is those 5-year updates of what's happening in a region is not agile enough. It's not real time enough to be of great value. It's good information, but the Regional Water Management Atlas is intended to be a real-time, updated atlas of the types of information that regions need to make decisions, demonstrate their accomplishments, and justify or show the rationale for the projects that they need to invest in the future. This atlas, we actually, again, had the opportunity to pilot. I believe there was a couple, 2 pilots, 3, and we have reported those again in one of the supporting documents. And so we're really excited in a good way to get others to take us up on piloting the Regional Water Management Atlas in their area of the state. And and ultimately, I see the sustainability outlook becoming part and parcel of the Water Management Atlas. So what are the outcomes and indicators in a real-time sense for a particular region of the state? Some of the things that we really tried to achieve is making it user-friendly, having a graphical user interface like a dashboard of sorts, doing things that we and local regional folks tell us would actually save them time by utilizing the Atlas, and that the Atlas is a tool to promote partnerships and relationship building. It is not the end in itself. It's a means to an end to get people in a region, and it goes back to within their own authorities coming together and agreeing on how they can jointly invest in their water management future. And we talked about having a recommendation where the state would actually help support the application of the Atlas in various areas of the state. So here's the
let me just, on the Atlas, we did have a question about how the organizations actually deploy the tool, how that.
That's part of the lessons learned. We do not have the recipe. We do have the 3 pilots that we describe, at least in those 3 cases. I don't know, Lou, if you have something to add there.
The examples that we had is everything from an existing database that might be there that could be mapped into the Atlas. So it would be very simple for an entity to basically map their existing data into the Atlas, and then it could be as simple as that they don't have a database, and therefore they could use the tool of the Atlas for entry and use that as their method of collecting the information and then reporting it as well. So, you know, it's a spectrum of interface that you might have into the tool.
Okay. I'm actually getting some folks online saying they'd like to volunteer, so we will.
Well, that's something that is actually, you know, as a project manager on something like this, it makes me nervous because we haven't, you know.
After I said I wanted to volunteer.
Okay, you guys need to get your story straight. Todd, you want to come up? Okay, so yeah, the answer is yes, we will get back to, because I have
to you and do
okay, and we are going,
So I'm a dot connector. That's my specialty. And for those who don't know, my superpower is rose-colored glasses. So I always kind of push for the optimism. And now that we're thinking about how we could implement actions or recommendations in Update 2018, as it may become part of the water resilience portfolio, here is the opportunity. And I think demand begets supply. So if there is a groundswell of interest for people to do or develop these atlases, that might actually weigh in on what gets into the water resilience portfolio. That's just one example. So we are pretty sure, and the next slide will show you why, all 19 actions are not going to get implemented concurrently from the get-go, but some will kind of lead in. But which ones get prioritized from those, I think, is more about what the stakeholders and the public say is important than what the Department of Water Resources or the state at this point says is important.
okay. So this particular last comment was from Jenna Voss. I will just hook her up afterwards with Lou. And once again, I did notice, I don't know, we do have at least one of the pilots is actually online with us. If any of you would like to comment during the question period that's going to be coming up next, just raise your hand. I'd be happy to open your mic, or you can chat with me. And with that, let me just let you get back to your slides.
Okay. So in Chapter 4 of the water plan, the first part of the chapter basically says, okay, if we were going to implement the 19 actions, how much would that cost? So we're saying, well, what's the innovation? Well, this is the first water plan in a long time that has actually put price tags to the recommendations in the plan. And so in that sense, for the water plan, doing this is an innovation. So in the way we've described it, this is again, a 50-year plan, and we're suggesting that to do the 19 actions would cost about $90 billion over 50 years. So let me just put that in context with information that you heard about before. Let's assume that was $100 billion over 50 years. That's about $2 billion a year. You heard that the state government has been spending about $2 billion a year. So what we're suggesting is over the next 50 years, on average, the state should about double, or would need to double its investment from $2 to $4 billion a year to be able to finance the recommendations in this water plan. The other thing that you see in the upper left corner is the point that Paul had made earlier, that of the $90 billion over 50 years, almost $78 billion is for local cost share. It would be state funding that would go to local and regional efforts to advance the recommendations of this water plan. And that would be both for capital and ongoing operation and maintenance costs. About $10 billion would go for state infrastructure and state ecosystem restoration, and about $2.7 billion, which is less than 3%, or about 3% of all the funding, would go for overcoming those systemic and institutional challenges. And those are the reddish bars at the very bottom of the bar chart. And this is intended to give you a relative sense for how much would go for improving agency alignment, empowering vulnerable communities, and informing and getting better data for decision making. The greenish bars are investment in infrastructure, the light bar, and investment in natural infrastructure or ecosystem functions, the darker bar. And you'll see that the lion's share of the funding are about improving human and natural infrastructure over the next 50 years. So where could the money come from? The other innovation in Chapter 4 is looking at funding scenarios. And we recognize in that, or describe in that chapter, what we call existing funding mechanisms, like the State General Fund and general obligation bonds and a number of other funding mechanisms, as well as novel funding mechanisms, are those that are not used or haven't been used as frequently. For the funding scenarios, we only use the existing funding mechanisms of general fund and general obligation bonds. So we look at three scenarios in three combinations of level of additional state general fund versus level of additional general obligation bonds. Scenario A was, what if most of the funding for these 19 actions, the $90 billion, came from an emphasis on new general obligation bonds? Scenario B says, what if the emphasis of all that additional funding was on state general fund? And scenario C is, what if we kind of use both state general fund and general obligation bonds to cover that additional funding? In Chapter 4, and we won't go into that detail now, you will actually see the results of what would that mean, A, B, and C, relative to the amount of existing state general fund for water, which, remember, it's only 2% of the entire state general fund goes to water at this time, versus what would it mean to the general obligation bonds and the interest and the debt service one way or the other. So that is another new feature of this water plan update. How much would this cost, and where could the money come from? We do not recommend where the money would come from. We'll leave that to the legislature and the governor, policymakers, to make that decision in the future. So just kind of the way forward, applying these tools, it's about setting the sustainability goals that have been discussed and agreed to, putting recommendations that are prioritized and are manageable in number, putting out a way, or having a way, to track the outcomes and return on investment from state investments, having an investment strategy, how much would it cost, and funding scenarios, where could the money come from. So with that, we could either take questions, and then we can go on to the next steps.
Sounds great. I will say we have been hearing more from the regions, and they're saying, yes, Atlas. So there's an outcry. You got started on that, Kamiar. We've got a question about the role of the DAC liaisons. I would like to note also that we do have a fair number of representatives from both rural counties as well as folks that are representing disadvantaged communities. And they would like to know, are you seeing community members possibly getting paid for their time, or staff, or actually having staff of these? We are being paid to work with the communities. Just conceptually trying to understand what that DAC, disadvantaged community liaison role might be.
This Kamiar. So one of the supporting documents is a product of a workshop from a few years ago with recommendations on how could disadvantaged communities be supported and empowered to have better participation in state water planning, and be better positioned to be eligible and receive state support and funding. And so a lot of the ideas that we considered came from that work, and one of their recommendations was, the state's a very big place. It's hard to have any one group or some people in Sacramento know what the lay of the land is. And so it would be better to have a network of liaisons that have a better understanding of the conditions of various underserved communities. And the intent, in part of the recommendation in the water plan, is to provide technical and funding support to DAC liaisons. So it's not just state employees doing this. It would be to support different liaisons in different communities to help network and pull the information together and have that communication with their respective communities.
And one of the questions, of course, is the barriers to participation, and how is there some way for that community to somehow be represented? Have the ability to come participate, do those kinds of things. Is any of that being anticipated?
It has been discussed over a period of time. Our only issue that we have in the state system right now is the way that we can provide through a volunteer. If a person becomes a volunteer and can come, we can compensate them as a volunteer of the water plan to participate. And that's
right. For the travel.
Per travel,
Not
per diem travel level. There's no, a lot of times we've heard that a stipend for participation would be nice. We don't have a mechanism in state service to be able to provide a stipend at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that we might, if there's some innovative way that can be done going forward, we'd like to hear it. But at this point, that's been our barrier to doing things like that.
Okay, great. We also just as an aside, did get a note about I had asked the person that was involved in the pilot to weigh in, and one of them, and this particular person made a note that they would like to talk a little bit about the data standardization process of that. So those are some of the little things that you're in the process of trying to work out and figure out how to roll things up.
Yeah, and that's going to be an ongoing process depending on what folks are collecting and what we think we need to know. So it's kind of one of those push-pull things that we have to kind of work out as we go forward. I'm looking at Gary across from me, and he deals with data all the time and probably understands this kind of an issue better than anybody.
I think it'd be useful if we understood what communities
And
are interested in.
yeah, and so you are who?
Oh, my name is Gary Darling, and I work for DWR. And I was just responding to Paul's question here that if we knew what communities were most interested in standardization with all the data in place, it would be really helpful, because then we could help to organize something.
Okay, I think that's definitely doable, and thank you again to the pilots that were involved in that, and this was from Ian and from SAPA, so thank you, Ian, for jumping in. Okay, well, with that, we still have a little bit more time. If there are any other questions,
Next step.
and next question, we just have a minute or two. Any other questions in the room or online?
I have a clarifying question for Paul. Paul mentioned that there's a recommendation for IRWM for baseline funding for 250K. Is there a similar recommendation for baseline funding for disadvantaged community?
Not a baseline funding. However, we do note that $250,000 for IRWM is to include enhancing disadvantaged community involvement.
Okay.
So, and that came out of the Stakeholder Perspectives report from a few years ago as a well-supported recommendation for IRWM.
Which is also a supporting document.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. There was one general comment about, is there anything on the horizon to create a water czar that could create some clear oversight for all things water?
I think that's a good question for Nancy Vogel.
So yeah, drop a note to Nancy Vogel, and her email is on the webpage. So
that's right.
And also provide recommendation who would be the most appropriate person for that.
One who would look good in a tiara.
With a scepter.
So, with that, I'm not seeing anyone else in the room or online, and let me turn this over to start wrapping it up.
All right. As far as next steps, at least through this calendar year, first of all, this is actually before item 1 there, we are rolling out the plan, so it's been released, and then we're also asking for anybody that would like us to come and speak, a board, a commission, conferences. That's a huge part of our rollout, and so I just wanted to put that out there. You can send a comment to our comment line if you would like us to come and brief you. So we like to talk to the water community at large, legislature, again, boards, commissions, and so on. And so we have a communications plan and engagement plan at the same time. We're open to invitations, and we're available. So some of the, I guess, post-processing of this update 2018 release, one key thing, we always like to hear from stakeholders, other state agencies, legislature, what worked well in this last water plan, and to me, more importantly, what can we improve upon for the next water plan? And so we're going to release a survey to that end, seeking that kind of feedback, and really we count on that kind of information. I'll talk about it soon in a little bit, but scoping of the next one is very much informed by this debrief of the process that we just wrapped up. And we get a lot of good ideas, a lot of good innovations, and so we invite that as well. And you'll see a survey. It'll be released on our website and through the e-news that Francisco had encouraged you to sign up for. And we expect that probably within the next 6 to 8 weeks. We already talked a little bit about informing the water resilience portfolio. We've begun mapping the recommendations that we just went over to the principles and directives in the executive order, and providing that as an opportunity, as kind of a starting point, or at least for consideration for inclusion in the water resilience portfolio. We've also provided a lot of information and assessments that had already been conducted, like the water balances, to set the stage and set a common frame of reference for planning in the water portfolio. Number 3 is important because somebody had mentioned, and they were right, that in the past we've transitioned from one plan to another quite rapidly. The clock's ticking. We have deadlines, and particularly for this update, we're going to take some time to actually develop an implementation plan and actually implement what we can of this update. So, of course, with whatever's in DWR's purview and the funding availability, we can begin implementing certain things. And on that note, I will say the Regional Water Management Atlas is a very high priority for us. And just to kind of be the bridge between CAMYAR's vision and suggestion that we seek adopters of this, regional adopters of the Regional Atlas, and then Lou's suggestion that yes, and we have a lot of other priorities, quote unquote, and funding and so on, constraints. I suggest that we actually don't constrain ourselves with existing funding and existing resources. We are in the process of trying to augment our capacity to support more fully the launch of this Regional Atlas. So I just wanted to underscore that invitation, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, and I think we should keep that inertia to the extent possible. So that would be one example of a recommendation that will be in the implementation plan, which, by the way, would be aligned with the water resilience portfolio actions. And then lastly, in terms of 2019, this is actually more probably early 2020 we would be scoping. So Bianca Sievers mentioned that the water portfolio will be completed around November timeframe of 2019. We're really holding off on scoping the next plan until that portfolio is done, because then we can key off of and take our cues from the water resilience portfolio prepared for the governor's executive order and properly scoping and emphasizing what we're going to do for the next water plan update. So that being said, early 2020, we expect to actually begin scoping the next water plan. Let's see, I think that's it in terms of early steps, next steps. 19.
Yeah, so we want to keep the information exchange going. If you don't subscribe to the Water Plan e-News, I strongly encourage you to do so, because this is one of our important tools for communicating with those who follow and want to know what's in the water plan. And notice last week's and subsequent weeks, we're including what we're calling the Water Plan Splash. We know there's a lot of content in this update, and it's hard for people who are seeing it for the first time to really get engage and immerse in the plan. So we want to use the splash as a way to highlight different parts of the water plan and hopefully keep the momentum going on that. The web page that Francisco showed you, we hope it's user-friendly. We recognize that because of the new ADA accessibility requirements on the state, that we aren't able to post all of the documents today. However, we want to underscore that you can get access to those documents by emailing the cwp.com, it's going to come up here in a minute, at water.ca.gov. So please use this to let us know if you want briefings, if you want hard copy or copies of the water plan, if you want any particular supporting document or information that may not be available today online. That information is there, and because we went out of our way to make this plan concise and readable, we want people to recognize there's a lot of good information that underpins it, and everyone can get access to that information. So with that,
come here.
Yes.
I do not know, Paul and you have already planned it, but if not, I would very strongly suggest that doing 2 deep dive webinars on the 2 of the innovations, Sustainability Outlook and Regional Atlas, would be very, very helpful.
Okay. Well, that's the other thing you can do to use the email is to let us know if you want more information or a briefing on any part of the water plan in greater detail. We would like to know that. So Lisa, is there anything else you need?
I think I'd like to do just a real quick shout out. The water plan, this series of water plans, we've been calling them the New Century Water Plans. And I just wanted to honor the fact that some of our advisory committee members have been working on these water plans close to 20 years now. So Grace Chan is on the line, Valerie Neer is on the line. They were both in that early crossover. Former director Mark Cowan is on the line right now. Just so a lot of appreciation for all the people that have spent so many years working on this. We'll also give a quick shout out to David Sumi, who was one of the very, very early staff that worked on this. With that, this is kind of moving into the last round. We're going to be doing an assessment, getting back. It's very, very important to get feedback on every aspect of this. The staff is, I'm hoping everyone observes that there's genuine interest in hearing from folks and that it's listened to very carefully. Are there any other last thoughts from anyone in the room? We've got a couple of newbies that I've never seen here before. Let me check in with the intern there. How did the day go for you? What was great? Yeah, thumbs up? Yeah. Awesome. You'd be willing to come to another water plan meeting? Absolutely. Okay. All right. So, Tanya, Paul, last thoughts?
Just thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear from you. This is kind of the beginning of a communication engagement effort, in my view, not the end.
That's great. It's, let's see, did we get another, note? Oh, yes. Oh, Al Herson, thank you, Al. Thank you so much, for checking in. Is there anything that came up during the water plan that we'd like to look at in 2023? And about the implementation for 50 years. I am going to run over. I got that question too late to take it up. A quick response to that. I don't want to run over. I have 1 minute left.
He's asking if
there's anything in the 2018 preparation that we think would like to tackle moving into 2020.
Well, and that's partly what we will be in a better position to answer that as the water resilience portfolio comes together, because we don't want to duplicate, and things that the portfolio plans to do will be kind of a good starting point for the next update of the water plan to start from. As Megan noted earlier, and we have that information, some of the comments that we received, we put into what we call a parking lot, because we knew that we didn't have the time or resources to address it for 2018, but recognized that it could go into 2023. So that could certainly be worth sharing with Al and anyone else who wants to know what are some of the ideas of possible next steps.
Well, great. Well, thank you. For those of you who are regular water plan attendees, you know that it is our practice to begin and end on time. I have not hit 3:01 yet, so we're going to call it a day. You're welcome. If you're in the room, feel free to stay. Many of you have been getting emails and comments from us. You please continue to send that. Everyone would like to hear from you. Have a great rest of your day.
Have a safe trip. Thank you all. The phone to close the line.
Oh, very nice.